It's time to look at yet another blog post. This time we're going to go into deeper detail of the land deformation and engine. This is going to be really interesting and a really deep dive onto the blog. So let's see what it's got in store for us. It's not a secret anymore that the ground in Farming Simulator 25 will deform, but you want some details, don't you? We'll go and get some. Alongside new screenshots visualizing how the ground will deform, senior software engineer Eddie Edwards from Giant Software will go further into detail on how it actually works. Eddie, tell us about you and your position first. What's your role? I'm one of the senior engine programmers for Farming Simulator. I've been at Giants since the early days of FS13. I created the original PlayStation 3 port, and I have been responsible for other ports of the Giants engine to PS4, PS5, Switch, and iOS. I'm very much the PlayStation guy at the company, but I also work on cross-platform engine technologies such as density maps, rendering, shader, compiler, some physics, audio, etc. There's not much in Giant's engine that I haven't worked on to some extent over the last 12 years, and in particular, of course, I created new technologies that bring us ground deformation for FS25, the improved density foot map system, the new terrain geometry system, and the terrain virtual texturing system. Firmness and viscosity. How the ground actually deforms. Depending on the ground type, the deformation and compression of the soil is dependent on the multiple factors. Take a look. So this is basically saying that it's going to be down to how big, how heavy, how wide the tracks are. It's going to be more dynamic, and as a result just leave for a better quality of texture that you're going to have once you've gone through the ground. Which factors define how the ground deforms? A number of factors affect this. Firstly, every ground type has a different level of firmness and viscosity. Tarmac cannot be deformed at all, for instance, while mud can be deformed a lot due to the different firmness. Driving on snow instantly crushes it, while driving on mud causes it to compress over longer time due to different viscosity. Also, if the ground is wet, this affects the deformation as well. Which vehicle you are driving also affects the deformation. The weight of the tractor and the width of its tires both affect the reaction of the terrain, and a slower moving vehicle will sink faster than a fast moving vehicle. So they really have taken into account pretty much everything you could ever dream of. They are taking into account the actual physics of real life and applied it to a game to make it so the ground deformation is more accurate. This is fantastic to see. And again, these screenshots look absolutely amazing. How does ground deformation affect gameplay? What will players feel? For the first time in FS25 gives a real physical response from the terrain. You will feel all the tractor bumping on the ground, and you will see it creating ruts and tracks. And if you go back and drive over those ruts and tracks, you will feel the effect from them as well. It's also harder to steer if you've dug into the ground, just as in real life. Driving in rain will be more difficult than driving when it's sunny. Your tyre configuration now has a greater effect too. You may need to consider which tyres are best to use for different seasons and different types of fieldwork. This is fantastic. So this is what I asked and pointed out in the video that we saw yesterday. Is it going to make it difficult to, is it going to actually affect the driving and the ability of your tractor when you are going through and deforming the ground? Are you going to get stuck in the mud? Are you going to have to think about the tires and tracks you're going to use and which is going to be best? The only issue I have with this is whether the game is going to warn you, whether the game is going to give you an indication like it does on 22 with your trailers, and it tells you what the trailers are for, what the seeder does. Is it going to give you a tooltip for the wheels to allow players that have no idea how any of this works? Is it going to give them an idea of, oh, well, if I use the wide tires, I'm going to be better off when I'm on, more level ground? Or am I going to need narrow tires for this? Am I going to need tracks? Like, what is going to be the best tires for me? And I hope that that's what they do. I hope they give tooltips for that, because otherwise it's going to lead to a lot of issues. The fun of plowing. Plowing on another level. While the deformation on the soil is individual to the machines, their weight and other conditions, one field activity in particular will probably feel a whole lot different in Farming Simulator 25. What kind of machines equipment will showcase the ground deformation best? Plowing is a new experience now. Plow creates real physical furrows which can not only be seen more clearly on screen, but also affect the tractor when driving over them. Also, machines with Caterpillar tracks come into their own now, as they can handle uneven ground so well. So yeah, like, your plows are going to really have an effect here, and really you're going to see the ground and the way it works. This is fantastic. Let's talk performance, visuals, and challenges. What are the technical challenges in implementing ground deformation? The ground deformation works on a grid size of 12.5 centimeters, which works out to 16K by 16K for a 2-kilometer map. That is 256 megapixels. The map itself is only 4 megapixels. There were various technical challenges with storing this data efficiently and also with processing the data efficiently, for instance, when tools like cultivators or plows work on the fields, and when vehicles drive over the fields and react to these fine-scale bumps and ridges. There is also a procedural level of ground deformation which is mapped with geometry in a similar way to how the terrain is texture mapped with images, except it runs on CPU instead of the faster GPU, so we had to heavily optimize this code. So that's going to be an interesting thing on how it renders and how it works. Also, we've got some indication of how big the maps are going to be here. So that's going to be really interesting to see as well, the scaling and whether modders are going to be able to take this scale and make it bigger, and whether that's going to really heavily impact performance and whether they're going to be able to optimize that code as well. How is ground deformation data stored and managed? Since ground deformation works at a higher resolution than we've dealt with before, we want to save memory in areas which are not deformed, e.g. on rocky mountains or in places where the player has not yet been. So we created a sparse version of the density maps. This stores tiles of data only in regions where deformation actually exists. Furthermore, to reduce memory footprint even more, tiles are all compressed using a more advanced version of the existing density map compression that we've used in the past. Additionally, to support fast operations on this high resolution data, we created a density map processing unit, or DPU, which is like a little GPU emulator that runs on the CPU and is capable of performing operations on density maps at much higher speeds than previously. It can be also programmed to using our in-house shade language, although this feature is not used in FS25. Yet. For speed, the whole system data compression, or DPU operations and procedural generation, is written using native SIMD instructions, SSE 4.1 or AVX2 on PC and consoles, and Neon and ARM-based Macs. This is far more SIMD optimized code in this version of Farming Simulator than we've ever had before. I'm not going to pretend like I knew what any of that was. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh yeah, no, it does this, it does that. I have no idea. The thing that I'm getting though is it's basically going to be a higher optimized vision than what you get in FS22. So in FS22, when you have your loading distance set, you can sort of see an area around your tractor of what you can see in detail, and then it sort of blurs it out as you go further along. This sounds like it's going to be doing something similar but at a faster rate, so hopefully your loading times, and it's going to make the game just look better in general. Tell us about how you optimize deformation physics for this performance. In previous versions of Farming Simulator, the custom vehicle physics was dealing with terrain at a resolution of 0.5 m. With terrain deformation and displacement, the resolution is now at 0.125 m, with a 4x greater in each direction, or 16x as many triangles. This made our wheel versus terrain collision detection 16 times slower, so we wrote a custom implementation for this for FS25, which is approximately 30 times faster than the old code. So overall, our vehicle's physics is now about twice as fast as before, even with all the new features. The new physics code involved some quality math and numerical analysis. Fortunately, I have a master's degree in mathematics, which helped me a lot in this task. Yeah, no, I'm not even going to pretend to know what the hell they're doing. Just a lot of numbers, trying to make things run smoother and quicker. And, you know, if they've got all these new features and they're going to make it run faster than FS22, that can only be a good thing. Because as we all know, one of the worst things about FS22 is loading into the map for the first time. It takes forever. So if they can do all this and make it run faster, that's a win for everybody. How does the game handle visual transitions for ground deformation? Another new feature for FS25 is the terrain quad tree mesh, which enables high resolution triangle rendering near the player but uses a lower resolution further away. There is no need to render the deformed geometry when it is 100 meters away. The geometry smoothly morphs from deformed to not deformed some distance from the player. However, this transition is quite well hidden because of another new technology in FS25, which is the terrain virtual texture system. Although deformation is not rendered in the distance using triangles, it is still shaded and rendered into terrain texture using graphics technique called normal mapping. So deformation is still clearly visible even on distant areas where the rendered triangle count is very low, and you can see the tracks left by AI vehicles, even if you're watching them from half a kilometer away. So they're basically going to smooth it but still have the textures and the shading so it looks like the deformation's there from a distance. I'm interested to see if this means if you've got crop destruction on or whatever, you're going to be able to make much more defined tram lines, which will help with the GPS and things like that. So it's going to really help for realistic players. I never have crop destruction on, so it's probably not going to affect me at all, but here we are. What do you personally like most about ground deformation in the game? It was a very rewarding experience to implement all these new technologies, and I love the fact that the result is not only a better visual experience for the player, but also that it interacts with physics and gameplay in such interesting ways. making FS25 a much more interesting and realistic simulator than ever before. I am interested about what's going to happen if you flip your track. And I know that shouldn't be a thing, right? Because we shouldn't be trying to flip our tractors. But I'm very interested if you're on a very muddy day and you have a really bad accident, not that I'm saying we would, but I know how I drive, and you flip your tractor in a field, are you going to have a massive tractor-shaped dent in that field, or is it only going to work for tracks? That is something that I'm going to have to test for science when the game comes out. However, moving on, overall, this looks really, really good. This looks like they've taken a lot of time, a lot of thought, a lot of effort has gone into making this ground deformation work. And I am really excited to see how it comes out in the finished product. Let me know what your thoughts on this blog are in the comments down below. And don't forget, you can support the stream by pre-ordering FS25 today from the link down below in the description and the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Ciao, ciao.